Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So just before we get started, I want to kind of take feedback from people, because Maghrib is getting a little bit later every day till we get to the middle of the summer. But we're keeping the class at 6, meaning if you stick around till iftar time, like tonight, we'll talk for about an hour and 40 minutes before Maghrib comes in, which I'm fine doing, right? I know those of you who know me for a long time, you know I could talk a lot. My kids are here today, by the way. You want to say salam to everyone? Say salam alaikum, guys. Yeah. Samira is not my child. She's a grown woman, but Medina and Kareem are my kids. Which I'm fine with, but I also want to make sure like the pace that we go at works for everybody. So what would be really helpful is, thanks Phil, if at the end of today, you all can kind of keep in the back of your head, if you feel like the duration of time that we're sitting here, engaging in conversation, discussion, like needs to reduce, meaning should we start at 6:30 instead of 6 o'clock? I'm going to start at 6, but I want to make sure that it's not a marathon or exhausting people. And if we need to go for an hour and 50 minutes versus an hour and 45 minutes, almost 2 hours, you all just let me know at the end of today, or over the course between this week and next week. Does that make sense? What we're saying? Yeah, great. So we've been looking at the Book of Assistance. If people want to pull that up, you just Google the Book of Assistance PDF, and it'll come up. And if you have a phone, you can pull it up. If you don't have a phone, if you want to just look on with the person's next to you. We're on chapter 6 right now, that is on reciting the Quran. And the next chapter is going to be on the acquisition of knowledge. But both of these are related to chapter 5, which is on just the concept of having a regular wird, a litany, for lack of better translations, right? Which Imam Al-Haddad in chapter 5 describes as recitation of the Quran, your prayer, doing certain adhkar, etc. But that chapter is rooted in an initial premise of time management being something that's really important. So I want us to go through the remainder of chapter 6 today. And if you haven't been with us, these are very short, concise chapters, easily digestible, but we're going through each one at a slow pace so we can extrapolate both kind of theory, concept, as well as practical ways to implement what the text is inviting us to. And so we got through halfway of chapter 6 last week, but the remaining half of it is very relevant to the next chapter on acquiring knowledge. But it's all going to fit into this frame of being able to design your life in a way that you fit in and prioritize things that you understand to be of importance to you, right? Because self-management is deeply attached to time management. Because time management essentially is a management of the self. And we're not meant to be individuals who just kind of flow freely, spontaneously. But what we talked about when we were looking at the chapter on awrad was one of the ideas of how we increase barakah, blessing in our life, the ability to do more with less, is by bringing structure and routine into our days. Do you know what I mean? Does this make sense so far? Yeah, for those of you who were here when we talked about the wird, like some months ago, does this kind of ring a bell in what we were talking about? I talked about the elasticity of time. I talked about when my father had a stroke and I was able to now be in New Jersey where my parents lived for months, but prior to would constantly be in a place where I said, I didn't have the time. I was too busy to do certain things. Do you know what I mean? But where did that time come from all of a sudden that I can now be there and nothing disrupted here, right? Like how if your internet broke in your apartment tomorrow and the internet guy said, I'll be there between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., you'd find a way to sit at home for 12 hours. Where do those 12 hours come from all of a sudden, right? And essentially the idea is that if you're saying I don't have time for it, what we're fundamentally saying is that it's not important to me in comparison to what I'm doing with that time comparatively, right? And this idea that how much we use our time is really the way that it encompasses the dimensions of Islam. So when we look at that Hadith Jibreel, and this is just in review, right? If you're kind of not following, just let me know. But when the angel Jibreel comes and he talks about what is Islam, and that's one dimension, and you add in what is Iman, and that's the second dimension, and then what is Ihsan, that's a third dimension. Those dimensions now are encapsulated in a fourth question of when is the hour in the Hadith Jibreel. But time is what brings it all together, because that's the one thing that just kind of keeps going. Do you know what I mean? So all of this has to be rooted in a recognition that if you're not designing your life, someone else is designing it for you. And if you're not in a place where you are recognizing that if you're saying yes to something, inevitably you're going to say no to something else, none of this is going to function on a theoretical, because the wird is about bringing regular practice of this, and to do it with a sense of how am I embedding presence into my routine, my structure. Do you get what I mean? So the Quran recitation that Imam Al-Haddad is talking about now in chapter 6 as a necessary regular action that you engage in on a daily basis requires now being able to think about this not in terms of what is not possible, but what is possible. What goes into my day, my week, where I am with regularity opening up the Mus'haf and I'm reading it. I'm just engaging in it. Because we said this last week, even if it's one verse, even if it's a handful of verses. But you got to spend some time in reflection now, not just on the idea of, is this something that's important, but taking it to its next logical step that says, is it important enough for me to build it into my routine? And when will I do this? Does that make sense? So I want you to sit for 2-3 minutes right now, subjective to you, as you pull up the text, right? He says in chapter 6, on reciting the Quran, you must have aware the recitation of the mighty book to be read every day. The least you should do is read one juz so that you complete it once a month, and the most is to complete it every 3 days. We talked about this last week, right? It's not necessarily that you're not reading it is somehow that you're committing a sin, right? But the hadith is constantly discussing the recitation of the Quran in terms of the benefit. Every letter, there's ajr in it, right? If you struggle when you read, you get more reward than if you read it fluently, you know? But you're in a place where it always talks about its recitation in terms of benefit. So what you lose is not the committing of a misdeed on your book. It's not haram to not read it, but if you're in a place where you don't read it, then you're missing out on the benefit that comes from only reading it, right? This is what this first half of this chapter is trying to inculcate within its reader, that you don't get the gain for the good you don't do. And reading the Quran is always bringing benefit in some capacity. Whether you understand the Arabic of it or not, whether you are reading multitudes of verses or not, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, when he gives insight on this recitation of Quran, he says that you got to just read it at a pace that makes sense for you. It's not comparative to somebody else. If somebody can read and do a khatam in a day or do it in a month, but you do it over the course of a year, there's not a specific obligation that has to be met, right? What our teachers teach us is that twice a year you want to have a khatam. That's a right the Quran has over you, but you want to be able to do it with regularity. So what I want you to do is to think about it in the context of your routine now, your schedule. Sunday to Sunday, wakeful hours, sleep hours, 24 hours in a 7-day week. Think within your routine, start to finish, on the assumption that you buy into that if you don't design your life, someone else will design it for you. And if you say, I don't have time for it, what you're saying is that it's not as important as what I am filling my time with. Where in your day, in your night, do you have time to read just a little bit of Quran? Just think about it. Not with guilt, not with self-deprecation, not with an unhealthy mode of reflection, but just objectively. Sunday to Sunday, in the course of your week, even if it's a verse, where do you have opportunity to engage this book just in reading the text? Does that make sense? So just think about that for yourself for 2 minutes, and then we're going to continue. Okay, great. So now if you just turn to the person next to you, how was it to go through that process of reflection, just on your routine, where you can fit Quran into your recitation? And then we'll come back and discuss. You don't have to say, this is when I'm going to do it, but what was it like to just reflect on the when I can fit it in, right? Like what comes up for you when you're doing that? Go ahead. Okay, so what was it like? What's it like to go through that reflective process? Maybe a couple of people can tell us. Like you're trying to figure out how to fit this into your routine. What's coming up for you when you're thinking about that? Yeah.
I think it's, the first thing is just embarrassment, because I realize I could be spending 99% of my time doing this, or 99% of my free time doing this, but instead I'm like watching TV or reading for fun or doing something silly. But then also hopeful, because it reminds me, yes, there's so much time that I could be doing this thing that could make my life so much better.
And it's not an either or, right? And this is why you have to read chapter 5 of this and review it to understand it in the context of the 6th chapter. Because what he says is you have to make time for eating and sleeping and all these kinds of things. You want to watch TV, like watch TV, you know? But to get to a place where it's a productive mode of reflection, but you likely have a lot more time than you might realize. Do you know? What else comes up for people as you're trying to think and reflect upon this within the course of a schedule?
I think for me, I'm not an Arabic speaker, and when I was speaking to you about this, that I don't know Arabic, so I don't think there's really a point for me to try to read even the transliteration. But you reinforce that no, there is actually benefit in, even if you play it on your Adhan app and try your best to follow along, to read it and understand it. That made it a lot more. That unlocked something for me personally, and I find great benefit in that. And thank you for saying that.
Yeah, and you gotta think, there's scholars of our tradition who literally memorized the Quran and they were blind. How did they do it? Right? Do you get what I mean? I've been to schools for children with special needs. You can go and find mushafs written in Braille. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? You have to address what comes up, to confront it, to be able to then make sense of it as whether it's actually a sensible obstacle or not. Do you know? But the gross majority of us in the room will find that we likely have moments that we can do this, and the challenge isn't that I don't have a structure of my spiritual kind of exercise in my routine regularly, but what will likely come up for most of us is that I'm not the one that's determining my schedule to begin with. Most of how I fit in my day revolves around just pure professional ambition, and that's about it. And then in the course of the rest of my day, self-care is not necessarily paramount. I'm not in a place where my physical, emotional, mental, spiritual sphere is something that I have been taught to value, let alone then think about how I utilize the rest of my routine with a prism of what's going to actually be replenishing or rejuvenating or to bring meaning, right? So you could watch TV and it could be really meaningful, but you could also do it and it's just a completely mindless act, right? It's one of the few things you could do when you're just exhausted and you can't do anything else. Do you know what I mean? But you can get to a place where presence in your actual scheduling becomes really important. Thinking about this not in terms of 90% of my free time. How many hours could that be in a week? Just what do you think that is if you estimated it? How much free time do you have based off of what you're defining as free time?
10.
10 hours in a week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty free.
Yeah. You only have 10 hours in a week where you're free? Yeah.
Oh, I feel like that's a lot.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So 10 hours a week, that is like, I have to fill it with 10 hours of reading Quran. That's not what's being said here, right? If you have 10 hours over the course of 7 days, you got an hour and 20 minutes a day, an hour and a half a day, that you're able to do something on average, like 5 minutes out of that day. But what Imam Al-Haddad is positing is that if you bring structure to your routine and you're in a place where you are now doing this with regularity, that's going to increase the barakah. And what you did with the 5 minutes on day 1, on day 51, you'll be able to do that much more with those 5 minutes. And what you do with the subsequent hour and 15 minutes is also going to have the presence of the blessing from those other 5 minutes that were structured. Because structure will just beget more structure. It doesn't mean that you become paranoid, but it means that you start to harness some of these tools, and it's not that difficult. You just got to sit down and bring some presence into it. And it says, where's the mindfulness in how I'm spending these moments? Do you get what I mean? And what he's saying is that for that inward sense of contentment and balance that escapes so many. You don't like anxiety, you don't like anguish, you don't like feeling dread. You gotta regularly read the Quran. It's going to be a source of just increase for you. Do you get what I mean? Why we want to understand this is that because the latter part of this chapter that we didn't look at yet, now we'll go into reflecting on the meaning of the Quran, right? What the verses that speak about Allah's rahmah and Jannah and all these good things that give you hope, or the verses of chastisement, or the verses of theology, or these kinds of things. Or he's going to talk about how there are prescribed times where you recite certain verses of the Quran, the Quls before you go to sleep, and Ayatul Kursi, and the last verses of Baqarah, or you read Mulk and Waqi'ah, and all of these kinds of things. You can't do like what is based on knowing to do without knowing the thing that you have to do, right? How can you fast if you don't know how to fast? Do you get what I mean? Right? How can you pray if you don't know how to pray? You need to know how to do it in order to do it, right? So these particular things now necessitate understanding this 7th chapter on the acquisition of knowledge and recognizing why that has to also be with regularity in the course of our routine, and attaching a sense of like why. Because many of us likely have heard hadith and heard khutbahs about those hadith and verses of the Quran that speak about the importance of knowledge acquisition, but incentivizing it for ourselves in such a way that allows for us to recognize, like, why is this something that needs to be done? Because this latter part of that 6th chapter is rooted in accessing the knowledge that tells you to do these acts in the first place. Or like if you can't read Arabic, right? Where many of us in this room are not native Arabic speakers. You're going to read certain verses of the Quran in your prayer, and to be able to have them be something that resonates means quite often outside of the prayer, you got to be in a place where you're making time to reflect on what those verses mean, right? And that's going to be now in this 7th chapter. Can somebody start to read it from its first paragraph on acquiring knowledge, and then we'll go back to chapter 6. So, on acquiring knowledge, can someone read? You should have a weird of reading useful knowledge. Yeah, go ahead.
You should have a weird of reading useful knowledge, which is that which increases your knowledge of the essence of God, His attributes, acts, and favors, makes you aware of His commands and prohibitions, leads you to renounce the things of this world and wish only for the hereafter, and brings your faults, the defects in your acts, and the plots of your enemy to your notice. This knowledge is present in the book, the Sunnah, and the writings of the leaders, Imams. It was collected by the Imam Al-Ghazali in his highly valuable books. Those who have religious perspicacity are well steeped in knowledge and have complete certitude, have great esteem for his books. If you wish to travel the path and arrive at the levels of realization, you must make it a habit to read them. The Ghazali books are unique among the writings of correct Sufis in that they are comprehensive, explicit, and greatly effective within a short time. You must read extensively in books of hadith and tafsir, Quranic commentary, and those of the people in general, for this is where a comprehensive opening and perfect traveling are to be found, as a Gnostic once said. However, you must be wary of whatever their treatises include by way of obscure matters and bare realities. These are present in most of the writings of Shaykh Muhyi al-Din ibn Arabi and a few of the Imam al-Ghazali treatises, such as Al-Mi'raj, the Ascent, and Al-Madnun Bihi, the Withheld.
Okay, we can take a pause here. If people want to just move in a bit too, just as the room is getting more filled. So the acquisition of the knowledge is something that is important, right? Like getting to a place where you're actually making the time to know these things. Why is it important to increase in knowledge, right? Ilm is the idea. Just knowing things. Why is that an important thing to do? So I'm not asking you, like, tell me what a hadith says about the merits, the benefits alone, or these kinds of things. To you particularly, why is this something that would have importance to it? If somebody walked into the room right now and said, I just converted to Islam, my kids are sitting here somewhere, right? And they came and they said, why do Muslims have to know things? Like, why does Islam emphasize knowledge acquisition? How would you answer this question? Not like in a supposed to or using words that are not familiar, but in your own understanding, why would it be something that is important to do? Like the acquisition of knowledge. If you could turn to the person next to you and just talk this out, why is this something that is important to do, right? What do you gain from it? What is the benefit from it? And then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Okay. So, why is this an important thing to do? Like if somebody was to come and ask you, hey, why are Muslims so into this thing? Like why? Why is that something? What's the incentive behind it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can say that the first verse which was revealed to Prophet Muhammad was Iqra. And when the angel came to him, he said, Iqra, read. And he knew that the Prophet didn't know how to read, but he emphasized that he should read. This is to show that it's really important to have knowledge. And I also believe that knowledge is connected to taqwa. Like you cannot have faith in something which you don't know. In order to have faith in Allah, we should have knowledge in Him. So it's just like I was telling him that when you join a new company, definitely you need to onboard. And the onboarding process, you need to have knowledge on the do's and don'ts of the companies. And it applies in all areas of life. So we are in this short journey of life for a short time. And we should not stop learning. And the day we stop learning is supposed to be the day of our last breath. Yeah.
What else? Other thoughts? What did we discuss? Or even in response to other comments? Yeah.
You may have said what I'd like to say with your words, inshallah, is that for me, the intellect, increasing my intellect brings me closer to our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and to Allah, and to who I am before I actually was. Like the capital T truth of who we are and how we can live on the inner and the outer.
How does it do that? Or maybe more responses. Like, what else did we discuss? Why is this thing of knowledge important? Yeah.
Like just one sentence, knowledge brings meaning towards our actions, I think.
Knowledge brings meaning towards our actions. Okay. What else? Yeah.
Knowledge, like, it gives us direction. Because, like, for example, if we didn't have knowledge, I think we would just be like, I don't know, lost. Like I guess, like lost cosmic energy, like just doesn't know what to do.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the knowledge improves the quality of life.
Okay. Great. Anything else? Yeah.
I can contrast it to like eating my diets. In the past, I would just eat anything, but the minute I became conscious of what does something do to my body, that knowledge helps me eat better and live a better life. Similarly, knowledge of like Deen, Islam, anything else helps me live a more meaningful life.
You were going to say something?
I was going to say Allah is worshipped through knowledge, and with knowledge comes intellect, like she says.
Anything else? Why is it important, like, to know things? Yeah.
I think as human beings, that's our uniqueness, is that we have intellect and we have aql and we have the ability to contemplate and to reflect. And so it's important to know things because it's our identity as human beings. And like everyone else said, through the fact that we're human and we have this gift, this blessing of having the intellect, we ought to use it such that we can come to the ends that everyone else mentioned.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
There's no like human manual, and so the idea of being able to understand how we're supposed to operate as a human being gives us some peace of mind, because now we can live our day-to-days and understand how to eat, how to think, how to feel. And certain things are black and white and other things are in the gray area, and not knowing what those things are brings turbulence in your mind and a lack of peace in your life. So having the knowledge to sort of overcome that, or to see where we were blind at one point. It just gives us a better quality of life.
Okay. Nobody said anything bad, right? Like, we're talking about wellness of life, we're talking about feeling kind of whole, connecting spiritually, connecting to the divine, finding more meaning, taking care of ourselves physically better. So why don't you do it more? Why don't I do it more? Like, what gets in the way? Right? Because Imam Al-Haddad, what he's saying here is, as part of now a daily litany, a regular wird, amongst the awrad that you have to have a regular practice, he says, in this first chapter. You should have a wird of reading useful knowledge. This is different from what he said of the Quran, because he said in chapter 6 in sentence 1, you must have a wird of recitation of the mighty book to be read every day, like giving it a daily basis to it. But for the acquisition of knowledge, he's saying that you just need to have a wird of acquiring knowledge. He didn't qualify it by saying every day. And you can look at examples of even companions of the Prophet. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh, he made a deal with another Sahaba where Umar would work one day and that companion would just be with the Prophet to learn. And then the next day Umar would learn and the Prophet, that other companion, would work. And then they'd get together at another time to share, this is what we took, right? But it's built into your structure, your routine. What gets in the way? What makes it difficult for me? And there could be a plethora of things, right? I don't know where to start. You know, I got to like a certain relationship with Islam that was just do's and don'ts. So the initial process of learning requires so much unlearning of things that are rooted in more culturally hegemonic attitudes towards religion. Everything that I was told that was just me was really not me, but just a preference that made what was permissible somehow obligatory, right? And then it made it hard to do the obligations or the prohibitions because it seemed like everything was haram, you know? Or the depiction of God that was given to me was an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to punish me. There's a multitude of things that are there that we can talk about in a little bit, but this fundamental idea of what the point of all of this is has to be something that at this juncture in our lives is understood. What this religion claims is that knowledge is the key ingredient to your heart finding satisfaction. To being in a place where you have contentment inwardly, knowing is a key mechanism to having that contentment. You ever lose a loved one in your life and you just want to know what's happening to them right now? You get to a place and there's this epiphanatic moment, this aha moment. I want to know what's happening to the du'as that I'm making. I want to know, why am I not getting this job? Why am I not marrying this person? Why is this not happening? The questions of why just keep coming in multitudes. You get to a place where you have now real beauty juxtaposed with real ugliness in front of you. And not just physical manifestations, but inward understandings. People driven just by pure senses of selflessness and goodness. And then put next to it a recognition of just people motivated by greed and self-centeredness. May Allah protect us from ever becoming people like that. You just want to know why. Like, why would you treat somebody in this way? Your peace of mind is contingent on knowing, why did you gossip about me? Why did you lie? Why did you break your promise? Why did you hurt me? There's so many different avenues, and then when we deepen into sacred knowing, the contentment of the heart and the peace of the soul, to get to the place where that nafs is defined in the Quran as being mutma'inna, a nafs that is in a state of rest. May Allah grant us all souls that are like this. It's fundamentally rooted in the ability to know. When Adam alayhi salam is created in an Adamic narration of creation, right? Allah tells the angels, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, that I am sending this caliph, this representative on the earth. Do people know what I'm referring to? In Surah Baqarah, right? Adam is the first human created. And if you read Surah Baqarah, the verses continue. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, that Adam is taught the names of everything. The idea of being Khalifa, we talked about in different like halaqas and in khutbahs, right? The idea that you're what's next. You know, I'll use the example of my kids. They're khalaf to me and I'm salaf to them. Because they what come next and I'm what precedes them. But the idea, as you understand this also, is that embedded in being a khalifa, a caretaker of the earth, or understanding a lineage and an ancestry that you're a part of, when Allah's telling the angels, I'm making a khalifa, meaning that there will be progeny. You will have what comes next. You are not just existing in a vacuum. Somebody was there that preceded you, right? That means like we come and we go. The angels, they don't come and go. The way that you and I pass on from this world into a next world. We're created beings, but created for eternal existence. The angels are fundamentally trying to understand, why is this human so special? Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. In order to be what comes next to something that precedes you, it means that this creation is going to also have a limitation on its existence. You as an angel exist forever. This thing's going to die. So it doesn't have all of the same capacities as the angel does, right? وَنَحْنُ نُصَبِّحُ وَبِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ, that we glorify you, we praise you, and we sanctify you. We don't do anything wrong. Why are you going to create this thing that's going to cause fasad and corruption and shed blood on the earth? This is what the verses in Surah Baqarah say. And then Allah says, Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun. I have ilm that you don't have. I know what you don't know. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. He taught Adam the names of everything. And then when everything in the heavens is commanded to prostrate to Adam, the distinction between Adam is not that as a human, he is this big, or this color, or this weight, or this profession, or this or that. The distinguishing factor of Adam alayhi salam from the rest of that creation is that he knows things. That knowledge gives him a certain dignity and distinction from the rest of what's taking place there. Do you get what I mean? And then when Iblis is interjected into the scenario, Iblis thinks he knows what he does not know. And it creates a different frame of understanding that based off of the absence of information, right? And people struggle with it. Imam Malik, who's one of the founders of the main Sunni schools of legal thought that still exist in the world today, that they said he was the shining star of Medina, that the Prophet references in the Hadith, a source of luminosity that would come in generations later, that he is known immensely across the impact that he brings to Islam in so many different ways. Somebody comes from as far as Al-Andalus to ask him questions. A far distance, 40 questions, he responds to 36 of them with I don't know. And they say, we came from so far. You're the shining star of Medina. Like, give us an answer. He says, I don't know. And I'm not telling you to think about anybody in specific, but you likely know people that even when they don't know what they're talking about, they still have an opinion. They still have a thought. They still have an idea on every single thing. They don't know how to say I don't know to things, right? It's not a sign of elevation, but knowing that you don't know is still knowledge that gives you dignity. Do you get what I mean? But pretending like you know when you don't, that's just disgrace. May Allah protect us from it. And the opportunity to now move forward in ways that you harness this, not for arrogance or to show off, but to understand that it gives me the capacity to draw meaning in different ways. When I know what it's like for someone who's a survivor of abuse, the world is very different. When I now turn my face, and I haven't heard that narrative before. When I know what it's like for somebody who struggles with a mental health condition, an emotional wellness condition. When I know what it must be like when I go through hunger, experiencing a benefit of hunger through my fast, and for a moment I can understand what is it like for someone who never has food. The abstract and the theoretical is not the same as the concrete knowledge base. Do you get what I mean? And it's what makes us unique in our humanity and what gives us distinction. But not just in terms of credentials and degrees, but a distinguishing of beneficial knowing versus knowledge that does not bring benefit. And knowledge that is beneficial can never be something that would cause pain to somebody else. Beneficial knowledge cannot be something that brings its practitioner to weaponize it to tear somebody down. Real good knowledge is what will bring and cultivate, both for the self as well as for the collective, a common good, to increase benefit and reduce detriment. What Imam Al-Haddad is saying, hey man, on a regular basis, learn things. Figure out how things work. Read, reflect, listen, engage. In the same way we think about it in terms of the Quran, in the chapter preceding, it's about time management, and you all just said, I got more time than I realized to just read a verse a day. You got it. If you think you don't, you are lying to yourself. You're kidding. What are you taking away from what we've talked about so far? Anybody? What were you just discussing? Yeah.
Just kind of getting over denial and actually facing the, try to complete the outcome of studying every day and not saying, hey, I gotta go and run these errands or do something else.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be every day, right? You have to keep that in mind. But not every day is also different from 0 days. Do you know what I mean? And just think about it, right? How often do you read? And what are you reading? And like, why are you not reading about these things? Do you know? To gain like a sense of peace. The world doesn't make any sense if there's not necessarily what sometimes our theology offers to us, right? A prism of recognizing like that there's a world beyond this one. Or if someone asked you like, who is God to you? What would you say? Based off of what the Quran tells you, right? Because most of you might believe in a God that's a creator, Al-Khaliq. Do you know a God that is Rahman? Do you know a God that is Rahim? Do you know a God that is Wadud, that is Latif? How would you know what you don't know? Do you get what I mean? And it's just about taking steps and going at a pace that makes sense. And a lot of what we have is what was given to us. And a lot of people tried their best. But you can't give somebody something you don't have. But if I don't have it because it wasn't given to me, is very different from I don't have it because I haven't tried to get it for myself also. Do you know what I mean? What else? What else is coming up for people? Yeah.
I think just reminding myself of the fact that doing something is better than doing nothing. It's like sometimes, I kind of psych myself out and be like, looking for trying to make significant progress over a short amount of time. But at the end of the day, something is better than nothing. I gotta keep reminding myself of that.
Something is better than nothing is great, but also like something is just good, right? And you become subservient to language. So it's not one of those things that you need 100%, right? Like 100% is an arbitrary metric. If you read like 10 pages of Quran a day and I read 10 verses of Quran a day, that doesn't make you better at reading it than it makes me. It's not that kind of setup, right? The entire framing has to break out of what a kind of worldview is rooted in the society that we live in, that has these metrics that are based off of what at the end of it, right? Like it's crazy, right? I don't know, my kids are here. I don't think they're listening to me, which is fine, right? But like, it makes no sense to me, the kind of schooling pedagogies that we go through, you know? That all of us literally could be in the same middle school class. And each one of us is going to go through the same subject material, get graded the same exact standard, theoretically, right? Because teachers also have their own microaggressions and racist tendencies. They're going to treat people differently based off of stereotypes, consciously or unconsciously. But within that, somehow each one of us is going to have to be as good as the rest of us in every single subject that is thrown at us in the course of this structured curriculum, right? Where you might have a natural aptitude in science and someone else in the arts and someone else in athletics or someone else in, kind of mathematics or whatever, how does it make any sense? But what it instills within the individual is somehow my measure is based off of where everybody else is in relation to these things. And that's not how Islam as a religion functions necessarily. Do you get what I mean? There's a story of Moses, peace be upon him, Musa alayhi salam, described to us through the Quranic narrative. The hadith expounds upon it more, where Musa alayhi salam is a prophet of God. And he's one of the major prophets of God, mentioned more than any prophet in the Quran. Musa alayhi salam is asked by the Bani Israel, who's the most knowledgeable person in the world? And Musa alayhi salam, knowing that he's a messenger, knowing all these things about him, he says, I'm the most knowledgeable. And Allah says to Musa alayhi salam, why did you say you're the most knowledgeable? Why didn't you say Allah knows best? And then he says, know this, there's a person in the world right now who knows more than you. And he identifies to Musa alayhi salam a man by the name of Khidr alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam, we're taught, like, the knowledge is not necessarily quantifiably more or less, but Khidr knows things that are different from what Musa alayhi salam knows. Musa alayhi salam is not in a place where when he's told this, that he says, I'm good, I'm the prophet of God in real time at this moment. I'm satisfied with where I stand and everything that we've achieved with the children of Israel. But somebody is in this place where he has this elevated rank, and any excuse to say, I'm fine where I'm standing, when Allah identifies that there's something that he doesn't know, Musa alayhi salam says, show me where the person is that can teach me this thing. Why? Why does he want to do that? What is it that he's seeking to satiate in that pursuit? And how do we shift our intentionality to want to have the same drive and motivation? Do you get what I mean? And what it's rooted in is not something competitive. It's not that I have to be the best. This is a foolish pursuit. But he knows the state of his heart and its contentment is rooted in the acquisition of just knowing more. Not quantifiably, but to have understanding, comprehension of things, to be able to draw meaning. This is what spirituality is. That you look at something and somebody else looks at something, you see it for what it's meant to be, not what is the most simplistic understanding. Do you get what I mean? And knowledge is a key mechanism in the acquisition of this. I want to read to you just a few hadith that speak about this concept of ilm. Right? Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anh, he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. Another hadith, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, he says, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, whoever travels a path in search of knowledge, Allah will make easy for him a path to paradise. People do not gather in the houses of Allah, reciting the book of Allah and studying it together, but that tranquility will descend upon them, mercy will cover them, angels will surround them, and Allah will mention them to those near him. I don't know why this happens, but I'm not God. God's messenger is telling you literally what will happen if you are in pursuit of this. Abu Darda radiallahu an, he says that the Prophet ﷺ has said, indeed the angels lower their wings for the seeker of knowledge. The inhabitants of the heavens and earth, even the fish in the depths of the water, seek forgiveness for the scholar. The virtue of the scholar over the worshipper is like the superiority of the moon over the stars. The scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. They do not leave behind gold or silver coins, but rather they leave behind knowledge. Whoever has taken hold of it has been given an abundant share. Why do the fishes even make dua for this person, right? Because they know the person who has real knowledge is not going to live in such a way that they're not going to remember or forget, rather, the reality of even the fishes in the seas. That if you really know what this religion is about, and you know what knowing actually entails, you're going to take care of everything in creation. The virtue of the scholar over the worshipper is like my virtue over the least of you. Abu Umama narrates this, that the Prophet says this. The virtue of the scholar over the worshipper is like my virtue over the least of you. Indeed, Allah, His angels, the inhabitants of the heavens and earth, even the ant in his hole, and the fish send blessings upon the one who teaches people what is good. In another hadith, Muawiyah reports that the Messenger ﷺ says, if Allah intends goodness for someone, He gives him understanding of the religion. In another narration, the Prophet says, O people, knowledge only comes by learning and understanding. Knowledge only comes by learning, and understanding only comes by seeking understanding. For whomever Allah intends good, He gives him understanding of the religion. Indeed, only those with knowledge fear Allah amongst His servants, meaning that they have this khushu', this kind of awareness. And he says, the best of you in Islam are those with the best character if they have religious understanding. And there's so many more verses in hadith that we can look at and reflect upon in this. But it's not like a Sunday school experience. Why do you need to memorize the dates of things? Why do you need to know the names of family members of the Prophet? Why do you study the seerah? Why do you memorize the Quran? It's not rooted in a core belief structure that is just because my parents told me to, or this is why I do it. Fundamentally, if you shift the paradigm, it's rooted in an understanding that your heart's contentment is attached to the acquisition of this. And what escapes a lot of people is the ability to answer these broader questions of just how things go in these ways, the why of it. Right? Because empirical understandings are not necessarily in conflict with spiritual understandings, but the way science can tell you how and what, it doesn't answer why so well. Why do we exist? If everything is caused by something else, then there's a necessary cause or source and catalyst of cause that exists without and independent of something being the cause of it. What is that? And how do you deepen in a knowing of that? When you start to know these things and start to engage in a process of it, then the pursuit of things in this world is not limited to how much money do I have in a pocket, but I can, through that knowledge, be able to answer the question of how much of this worldly acquisition is enough. Then you can start to know that your goodness is not rooted in whether you have a ring on your finger or not, or whether you have children or not, or you have this house or not, or this car or not. But you can find contentment that allows for you to have balance through any of life's difficulties. But the knowing becomes a key part to it. If somebody says, where do I start? There's 4 buckets of knowledge that are obligatory upon each of us. There's individual obligations that we have. It's called the Fard al-Ain. I can't pray your Fajr prayer. You have to pray your Fajr prayer. Just like you can't pray my Fajr prayer, I have to pray my Fajr prayer. How can I pray Fajr if I don't know how to pray Fajr, right? But not knowing how to pray Fajr is not an excuse for not praying Fajr. Does that make sense? So bucket number 1 of obligatory knowledge, of 4 if you're looking for a starting point, is 1, you have to have a foundational understanding of just ritual and practice. These things become relevant to when they are mandatory in your life. So if I'm not somebody who has the wealth to give zakat, I don't have to know how to give zakat. Does that make sense? Yeah? My kids, are they still here? Yeah. They haven't hit an age that gives them the categorical identity of being what's called mukallaf. They're not in a place where they are accountable in the ways that adults are, right? So they're not required to know how to fast, nor are they required to know how to pray. But when they hit an age of discernment, then they have to know how to do those things. But for us, relevant to it, you don't have to know how to perform Hajj until you're going on Hajj, right? But all of us in this room, we have to know how to do our prayers. This is bucket number 1, rituals, like a fundamental understanding of practice. Bucket number 2, which is not in priority and arguably is even more important, is you have to know foundational theology. This is not a religion that teaches you to pray. This is a religion that teaches you to pray to God. And I guarantee if I asked everybody one after the other to take out a sheet of paper and write down, who is God to you? And then we read them out one after the next, a lot of you don't know who God is to you. And it's not going to make it easier. It's going to make it more difficult to make sense of this world. Foundational, fundamental theology. Bucket number 2. You got to know it. Bucket number 3. You have to know fundamental understandings of how to take care of your heart. You can call this self-care, spirituality, but how do you take care of your inner self necessitates knowing how does the inner self work, and then with specificity for you, as well as more generic understandings. And then bucket number 4, you gotta know how Islam applies to you in your given phase of life. So if you choose to be a doctor, what does Sharia say about being a doctor? If you choose to get married, what does Sharia say about being a spouse? If you choose to join like some kind of artistic venture, you choose to even professionally become an artist, what does Sharia say about this? I'm a butcher, in addition to other things that I do. I'm assuming many of you in this room are not butchers. Is anybody in the room a butcher? No. You don't have to know what Sharia says about being a butcher. But if I'm going to go into that as a practice, entrepreneurially, as a business person, what does Sharia say about business? What does it say about being an entrepreneur? You have to know in your given phase of life, as things start to accumulate and you move forward, what does Islam say relevant to this thing that I'm about to get into or I'm already immersed in? Do you get what I mean? These are 4 buckets of that kind of information. Where does one go to start learning these things? Well, you got to read the Quran, you got to read the Hadith, Imam Al-Haddad is telling you here, read books of tafsir, read books of hadith, but having starting points for yourself that allow for you to go at a pace that makes sense for you. Reading lists are in abundance. All kinds of podcasts are in abundance. The challenges that many of us have today is not the accessibility to information, because you can literally go online and access anything. It's about being able to make sense of it. How does it work, right? We had a sister in our community. Some of you heard me tell the story before. She's a new Muslim. She was super excited to celebrate Eid al-Adha, first holiday as a Muslim. And she's sitting and jumping around. I'm going to do this thing. And then I sat with her a week, 2 later in my office, and she's in tears. I'm like, what's going on, girl? And she said, I looked up how we celebrate our holiday, and it said I got to kill a goat. And she said, I don't even know where to buy a goat. And do I kill this thing in my apartment? And I was like, no, man. Like, don't kill any animals in your apartment. Why would she know different? The person who wrote what she read was not thinking of her when they wrote it, right? We have people in our community who, when they embrace Islam, they've prayed their prayers for years in like shorts and t-shirts, because what they read did not give them a deeper understanding of it. And then you meet people who they just don't know. You don't have to know a lot to be Muslim. The bar of entry to Islam is not here, it's here. But when you are in that place where you can embrace that as a God-given mercy, you got to also be comfortable when somebody asks you a question to just say, I don't know, when you don't know the answer. But for yourself, you start taking seriously the contentment of your heart, and you think out pedagogically, what's the best way that I learn? Some of us learn well by reading. Some of us are visual learners. Some of us learn better by listening to things. But you gotta start someplace, and you have to build it into your routine. But I'd like for you to talk out with the person next to you, what gets in the way of the acquisition of this? Because this is a text on spirituality. It's about elevating the celestial self. It's not about elevating the physical self, but understanding how it's all connected to each other. So this is rooted in making the heart sovereign and bringing contentment inward. So where and how, the benefit is rooted there, right? Knowledge elevates the practitioner of this religion, where intention is good, understanding is good. It brings you to a place where you can draw more meaning from it. So what gets in the way, right? Because juxtapose the 2 chapters, Imam Al-Haddad, in the part where he's talking about you need to have a wird of Quran, he said read the Quran every day. In acquiring knowledge, he's not saying do it every day, but he's saying you have to have a regular wird of acquiring knowledge, reading things, engaging in this. What makes it hard to go about that as a process? And what you got to understand here is this is likely one of the things that impacts most of us in the room. So your willingness to be vulnerable and to express will enable somebody who doesn't feel comfortable in voicing their thoughts to actually benefit from us being able to troubleshoot how this is something we can engage in together. Do you get what I mean? So if you can turn to the person next to you, what gets in the way? And then part 2, what would make it easier, right? How is this something that I can actually do? So what are the obstacles and what are the things that will compel me forward in the acquisition of this? And then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. From me.
In 20 minutes. Okay? They went to go pick up the pizza right now. Good to see you, man. Good to see you, man. You're getting out?
Yeah, I got it download later today.
Yeah, go for it, man. Yeah. I like this jacket. It's good looking. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'll see you next week. Yeah. All right, cool. So thank you so
think it's an issue with YouTube. Because I tried it.
It worked for you?
It's like watching. It did work, yeah. It did. So I think it's just software. No. Okay. Yeah. So maybe it was just like some kind of lag on
It's fine. We'll mess around. It's the first time we're doing it. You know? So we'll figure it out. No, meaning, like, over the last month, we've done it, but we haven't done a deep dive into it. So we can figure out what these things are. There's definitely people who can help us with this also. Yeah. See what makes sense. Thanks, man. Did somebody go to get the food? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Alright, I need you 5 minutes to come off whenever you get a chance. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah. Million work people around. Okay. So just say I'm not busy. Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna say whatever you feel. I'm gonna say for thought.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
So like if I tell someone about
That's what I get to do.
going through the hospital and stuff, it's gonna be like, it's gonna have to help make my heart soft. That's their path. My son talked to my dad, they're gonna try to, they might go through a different path. That's always not your
Okay. Can we just have everyone move in closer? If we leave some pathways open so people can come and pray, in the corners of the room, that would be great. Yeah. So what are some of the things that get in the way? Right? Because when Imam Al-Haddad talks about awrad, he's talking about this in the frame first of time management. So you're bringing structure into your routine, right? You have to be in control of your scheduling. So I want to build this in with regularity. What's making it hard for me? I'm fundamentally in a place where my behavior shows that I value more what it is that I'm putting my time into right now. And giving an hour for God can mean a lot of different things, but you also have to incorporate into this a broader perspective that says, this is a source of what real contentment is for me. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, literally right from the beginning, the first one of us ever made was given knowledge. The opportunity to even fundamentally turn back to Allah after a mistake is made is rooted in recognizing that the pursuit is not perfection once you know, but knowing helps you to actually know how to get back on your feet after you fell down. Do you get what I mean? But it's all there. What else? What else gets in the way? Yeah.
I guess I was looking about the certain formalities, for example, if you don't have any wudu, you can't hold the Quran, or for example, if you're not, I guess if you're lying in bed and you have I want to read Quran, but then you're going to be I'll have to sit up properly, and then maybe I guess, change, like, you know, do I have to wear cleaner, change my clothes, like these kind of like formalities?
So this is on the Quran chapter, which was a chapter before it, right? He's making a distinction. He said, have a wird of reciting Quran and have a wird of acquiring knowledge, right? So the recitation of Quran is a different step, right? It's like saying you should run and swim. They're two different things, right? So we're just talking about reading books, listening to lectures, going to classes, engaged in something structured, something formulaic. It can be whatever it is, because Islam is for everybody. Here now, the idea is, what gets in the way for me to learn more things, to know more things? Do you get what I mean? Yeah. Somebody had their hand raised? Yeah.
We talked about how we gravitate as humans towards things that are enjoyable and things that like we actually want to do. And so kind of like the thing that gets in the way for me at least is if it's something that I'm like, oh, I have to go do this today, instead of something like, oh, I get to go do this and enjoy it. It's like changing that perspective, but also like making it so that you make whatever knowledge you're trying to acquire, that setting, that environment is enjoyable for you. So like, I don't know exactly how to do this, but things that I've thought about doing is kind of like setting aside a time that I feel not stressed out because I'm not like running to it, and then like light a nice candle and like get a drink for yourself. That like just sets aside space where you're looking forward to it and enjoying the experience.
Amazing. Why don't you do it?
Why don't I?
Yeah, why do you think about doing it, but you don't do it?
I don't know. I'm kind of with you.
Yeah?
I'm thinking about that.
I don't know. That laugh makes it seem like you do know. Yeah, go ahead.
I think for me, it's knowing that the more I know, the more I will have to make changes in my life, or will want to make changes in my life.
Amazing.
And wanting to make changes in my life takes effort, and effort is hard.
Yeah. And they're just trying their best, so they're going to go find like this book or watch this YouTube video or do this or do that. That's different from me saying, like, I got to address what's getting in the way. And this is a really important thing to understand. You can't be scared. Think about what Shaitan does to skew our trajectory for growth and instills doubt within your heart to get you to believe that it's better to be standing still than moving forward, or even taking a step backwards, which gives you a different vantage point. And you walk on eggshells in your relationship with Allah. Do you get what I mean? If I have the ability to do, and I still don't do, this is a dua that the Prophet would make. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-'ajzi wal-kasal. That, oh Allah, I seek refuge with you from ajaz, which is inability, and kasal, laziness. But ajaz is not inability that like I can't do it, right? I don't know how to build this couch. I can't do it. But ajaz is not saying that. It's an inability that says I have the capacity, I'm still not doing it. Do you get what I mean? Right? And then it's just a waste of God-given talent, man. And you know who's deprived the most when you don't use your potential? It's you. The secrets that people have access to within their hearts, when they can tap into knowing, deep knowing, ma'arifah, an understanding, an intimate knowledge of God, that then transforms how this world works and everything that goes into it. It's a perfect strategy of Shaitan to make you scared to know more. And you got to just squash that and say that my strength is rooted in this. Do you get what I mean? And you can't be scared to say that if it's hard to bring it in, you're just trying your best. That's why knowledge of God is important in all of this. Does that make sense? What else comes up? What else gets in the way for people? Yeah.
Even though I'm Arab, like my Arabic is very it, but I have a hard time like understanding the Quran, Hadith, and whatnot. So it just like it really demotivates me that when I hear Quran, there's like key words I understand, but I'm not grasping the full message. So that's like a huge demotivator. But lately, especially during Ramadan, even though I learned a lot of Quran and memorized when I was younger, I lack the meaning. And the quality is more important than the quantity. It doesn't matter how much you memorize if you don't know what it means. So I've been going back and like relearning those surahs that I learned when I was like 5 years old and understanding the meaning. And that has helped me get closer to Allah so much more. So I think learning the Arabic language has definitely made my relationship with the religion stronger.
Great. How was it learning the Arabic language in that way, Quranic Arabic? Was it easy?
It wasn't easy, but
Good.
it wasn't as hard as I thought.
Yeah.
And subhanAllah, like when you know the meaning, you just become more connected and you're like, wow, like our religion is truly so amazing. And there's like so much more that like I was missing out on. But after I learned the meaning, I was like, wow, I wish I knew this more.
And how long did that take, the first time you did it? If you can like walk us through what that process looked like.
It's still an ongoing process, but it was like just like an hour every day. And by the end of the month, I learned like a lot.
Amazing, right? You gotta start somewhere. Every expert was a novice at some point. There's no teacher that wasn't a student in some moment in their life. Musa alayhi salam and Khidr alayhi salam, who we talked about briefly, that Moses goes to seek out Khidr to know more. In one of the instances of their interaction, they are on the deck of a boat. And there's a bird that is on the deck that then sweeps off of the boat into the body of water that the boat is traversing and sips from the water. And Khidr alayhi salam says to Musa alayhi salam that, do you see this bird that drank this water? And Musa alayhi salam says yes. And he says that water that it drank, that's like the knowledge of you and I, arguably the most knowledgeable people in the world. And that vast body of water from which it drank from, that's the knowledge of Allah. There's like so much you can know, always. And it's not about thinking through this in a way that is burdensome or your back is against the wall. Your heart's contentment is rooted in the acquisition of knowledge. And you have to make it a priority through that prism. Knowing even subtle things, like little things that can make transformative why I do what I do in the course of my day. But those 4 buckets of knowledge are where you want to start from, at a base, the obligations of what we discussed, and then building off of that. If I could recommend anything to any of you, I'd say pick up some books that talk about the divine names of Allah. You want a place to start? In any language that you speak, you can find these books. Find a buddy, talk to him, talk to her, and say, hey, what does it mean to you when Allah says He is Ar-Rahman? You can talk to people. We can connect you to them. I'm happy to talk to you. The grammatical form of Rahman in Arabic is the Fa'lan form. When you have that, it's denoting a quality that is the primary, manifest, emphatic quality at that time. So if somebody says, I'm exhausted, they say, Ana ta'ban. Then I'm exhausted. I'm so exhausted that exhaustion is me. If you're hungry, right? Like my kids are hungry right now. My son came to me an hour ago. I'm not like a bad dad, don't get me wrong. But if you asked him, are you hungry, Kareem? He'd say that I am hungry, right? Ana jaw'an. That he's so hungry that hunger is him. If you didn't do something in your house growing up and your mom got upset with you and called you lazy, she might say you're kaslan, that you're so lazy that laziness is you. That's what Rahman fits into as a grammatical form. Do you get what I mean? There's people you can ask these questions of. It's not a problem. But if you're going to start someplace, just reflect on who Allah is. None of this makes sense if you don't understand in your own capacity, our limited capacity, who God is to us. The trials don't make sense. The difficulties don't make sense. The joys don't make sense. You will not know how to appreciate fully the gifts, the bounties you've been given. It's a starting point. Point number 2, find somebody you can learn Islam from. And if there's an absence of resources, then either take it upon yourself to become the person who goes to know, or helps to build the capacity to have somebody that can do that. Somebody says to me, right? I'm not saying this to any of us. Alhamdulillah, we have a great community. We have had scholars in residence. We have chaplains and others who are on our staff still. But fundamentally, we're waiting to just kind of see what our next steps are strategically, right? Like I said, we're going to buy our own space. We're going to build more shelters, these kinds of things. But communities need to provide for the resources that serve the communities. So if we want to have 10 people here to take care of a 12,000 person community to teach you Quran based off of when you're free, we got to pay people like reasonable wages, right? There's a ton of online resources you could touch base on. Work at a pace for you. I have studied with shiuch who are overseas over live stream, right? Some of my teachers are sitting in parts of the Indian subcontinent, the Gulf, like different parts. Some are getting used to like online teaching, right? I don't know if you've ever seen like a brown sheikh who when they're teaching or reading Quran, they just rock back and forth. You know what I mean? And you imagine you're on the other end of a laptop. This man with a big turban is going back and forth into the camera. So his face is getting big and it's getting small. It's getting big and getting small. I'm like, Sheikh, please don't do this, right? But he doesn't know. But you got to know who your professors are versus who your teachers are. Next week we'll talk about what some of the characteristics are that luminaries of this deen have given as insights to say, this is who you want to actually have as a teacher versus somebody you're just taking information from. Both have value to them, right? A primary distinction for me is that the person who's your professor, don't take their character traits on. The person who's your teacher, let that be somebody who's just a good human being. You'll take etiquette from them and adab from them. You'll learn good character from them. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? But it has to be important enough. Imam Al-Haddad, he's saying, with regularity, you build into your routine as a part of your wird, the gaining of knowledge. You're reading things. I want you to do, just before we take a pause for Maghrib, we're going to have iftar, inshallah. Please join us whether you're fasting or not. I want you to think just in your routine, the same way we thought about it with the Quran, right? And go back and read the preceding chapter where he's talking about having a wird of Quran, because the second half now is about, when you read this, it's not about quantified numbers of verses in your prayer, but you want to read with quality so that the verses are giving you an insight, the meaning is there. You can reflect on the verses that talk about Allah's majesty, draw hope from the verses that speak about Jannah, to take insight and build like taqwa from the verses that talk about chastisement and all of these things. You can't do that if you don't know, right? Just like you said, you read the verses and you're like, there's more to it. So I put in the time to learn the meaning outside of the prayer, so when I'm reading it in the prayer, like there's insight that's there, right? And then in the last paragraph of that chapter, he's saying when there's prescribed times, prophetic practices, sunnahs around reading certain verses of the Quran, then you do that. You can't do that if you don't know the times to do those things, right? And then you aren't going to bring yourself to do it if you don't know what the benefit is for it metaphysically. Like, what's the gain on some of that? And that's why ihsan, everything that we're talking about, is not a rotely memorized science. That you can rotely memorize like ritual and practice. You can rotely memorize books of theology. Ihsan has an element of experiential knowledge to it. So part of this is going to be building out an awareness of how to reflect and contemplate on things. Do you get what I mean? So you're drawing understanding in that way as well. So take a minute in the course of your day, in the course of your week, in the course of your month, at your own kind of capacity. Just reflect for a minute, where do you have in your routine opportunity to be able to actually engage in this practice of just learning, of increasing your knowledge? Does that make sense? Let's think about it for a minute. Let's go ahead within yourself. Picture your day, Sunday to Sunday, 24/7. Where is it going to come for me? Okay, we can take 2 minutes and just turn to the person next to you. What are you taking away now as we wrap up for tonight? And then we'll come back, just a couple announcements, and then we'll call the adhan for Maghrib in 6 minutes. To myself, you know? That's different from me not doing anything. Do you know what I'm saying? So you don't want shaitan to get in your head on the other way, too, right? It's like ultimately still having the same end result of incapacity. I'm just stuck not doing anything, you know? So you pick up a book and you read it. Do you know what I mean? Like you go to a class, like you're taking steps towards something that's kind of indicative that, you know, I'm getting myself going. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Can I just respond to that? I think it can be an overwhelming idea of there's so many things we could know and that we have to then adhere to.
We'll bring it inside.
But I think Allah is very clear about things that are obligatory upon us, like through the Quran and the Hadith. So if you stick to making sure you know those basic obligations that are accessible even to a new Muslim who barely knows Arabic and barely understands the Quran, then you should feel okay. The other learning is, I think, on top of that for extra blessings rather than something you'll be punished for. That's how I see it. I don't know if that's true.
Well, that's why we said there's these 4 buckets of obligatory information, right? So if you weren't here, you have to have foundational understanding of just ritual and practice. You got to know how to pray your prayer, right? You got to know how to fast your fast. If you are required to give zakah, you have to know how to do that. Going for Hajj, you have to know how to do that, right? You also have to know that going for Hajj is when you have the means to. Not when you feel like it, not like when it's convenient, but when you have the means to go. That's the criteria, right? You have to know foundational theology. It doesn't make sense, this religion, if you don't make it about God. So if you don't know anything about God, like you have to start knowing those things, right? You have to know fundamental spirituality, how to take care of your heart. You have to know relevant to what phase of life you're in. What does Sharia say about that? So you're a doctor, what does Sharia say about that, right? You don't have to know like what it means to be a doctor if you're not a doctor, or what Sharia's guidelines are on that. But those obligations are not like this endless kind of journey, but they also serve then as a catalyst to just building more meaning and contentment into one's life, right? Okay, we'll see everyone next Monday, inshallah. Please stick around for iftar after Maghrib is done. Assalamu alaikum.